Albert Wren started believing he could outthink everybody. Police, employers, the gang they'd once worked under in Sheffield. Especially the gang. So when money disappeared after a job near Attercliffe, the brothers disappeared too. Which is how two men from Sheffield ended up on a moorland path above the Yorkshire Valley on a cold night in 1928, carrying stolen money and walking a road that refused to let them leave. There's paths in Yorkshire that older people once warned against crossing after dark, not because you would disappear, and not because something would drag you away, but because the land itself might refuse to let you pass it properly. Up high in the country between the valleys, where the old wall breaks across the moorland, there are still trods people avoid once the light goes. One of them was known locally as Pixie Walk. Albert was the older brother, broad-shouldered, quick-tempered. He was the sort of man who walked into rooms as if he'd already owned them, and Tommy followed him everywhere, always had. They met Eli Gallagher outside a labour yard a few towns west. Yorkshireman, lean as wire, face weathered years older than he truly was. He knew the valleys, knew which farms kept dogs, which farmers locked doors properly, and which ones still trusted old habits more than locks. And after enough ale, Eli mentioned a farmer beyond the moor who'd recently sold livestock at a market. Cash not banked yet, still on the farm. Hidden, same place his father used, and his grandfather before him. Behind the flour sacks in the old feed room. Albert laughed straight away. Behind flour sacks. Eli shrugged. Says nobody ever thought to look there. Tommy grinned into his pint. Till now. The village pub sat low beneath the hill. Warm windows against the wet black countryside outside. The brothers drank hard there. Too loud for the room. And Eli was recognised. Not welcomed exactly, but recognised. People watched the brothers carefully, especially Albert. The landlord kept polishing the same glass whenever Albert spoke. Eli leaned slightly closer across the table. Fastest cooked back over old Trod. Tommy frowned. What's that mean? Eli hesitated. Locals call it Pixie Walk. Albert barked laughter loud enough for half the room to hear it. Fairy path. Tommy joined in immediately. Careful, Al. Tiny little pixies might carry us off. Then Eli laughed. But only because not laughing felt worse. Near the fire, an old man lifted his eyes from his drink. Not to the brothers, to the path. And he said quietly, to no one in particular, land up there remembers more than folk think. Albert smirked into his pint. Well, tonight, it can try remembering us. Nobody laughed at that one. They left after dark, and as the three men walked out beyond the last cottages, the village seemed to close behind them. Curtains drawn, doors shut, lights disappearing one window at a time. The countryside opened suddenly after that. No factory smoke, no tram bells, no voices through brick streets. Only fields, walls, black hedgerows, and sky. Too much sky. Tommy noticed it at first. more stars than he'd ever seen above Sheffield. Cold, clear things staring down over the moor. The lane worsened as they climbed, mud pulling hard at their boots, the wet grass soaking their trouser legs black to the knee. And Albert kept swearing at the countryside itself, at the smell, at the cold, at the dark that seemed to stretch forever beyond the walls. But after a while, even Albert stopped talking so much, because the silence out there didn't feel natural to them. No carts, no engines, no drunks singing outside pubs. Only their own breathing and the distant shifting of sheep somewhere beyond the dark walls. Ahead of them now, far across the rise, they finally saw the farm. One lantern burning low near the barn, small against the open land. Not grand, not wealthy, just old. Low stone house, barns crouched against the wind, walls black with weather and age. A dog barked somewhere beyond the yard, and it settled again. Eli slowed. There. And he pointed towards the barn. Feed room's through back. Albert frowned. Money's not in the house. Eli shook his head. It's behind the flour sacks. Tommy laughed quietly through cold breath. Behind the flour sacks. And Albert smirked. Well, somebody's finally thought to look. The yard was thick with mud. Tommy nearly lost one boot pulling through it. Eli knew the place too well. That unsettled Tommy more than he admitted. No hesitation. Straight through the side door, past hanging tools, past old tack hooks fixed into beams polished smooth by years of hands. The feed room sat at the far end, small and cold. Barely more than a stone storage space with shelves and sacks stacked shoulder high. Albert lifted the lantern. Flour dust drifted through the lights like smoke. Then Eli crouched beside the back wall, reached behind the lowest row of sacks, and pulled out an old tobacco tin wrapped in cloth. Notes, coins, folded market money bundled tight inside the cloth. Not riches, but enough. Enough to disappear properly for a while. And Albert grinned for the first time all night. Worth a bloody walk now. Then, somewhere above them, a floorboard moved. All three men froze. The dog outside erupted properly, deep, violent barking tearing through the silence of the yard. A lantern moved in the upper window of the house. Albert grabbed the sack. Move! And the three of them disappeared back out into the cold Yorkshire dark. The cold hit harder once they'd left the farm behind. Open country cold. The sore that found its way through coats slowly until your shoulders ached with it. Albert carried the sack first. Swagger still in him from the money. But the walk felt longer somehow. Harder underfoot, the mud dragging heavier than before. Eli walked ahead without speaking, following the narrow line of the old trod. No signposts, no proper road, just generations of feet wearing a faint path through the moorland. And after a while, the stars began disappearing. Cloud moving slowly across them. Thin mist gathering low over the fields ahead, and the world tightening itself smaller around the three men. The first wrong feeling arrived quietly. Not fear, just irritation. Tommy stopped beside a broken stretch of path. Hold on. A bent wooden gate leaned near the edge of the path. one hinge hanging loose. Albert barely glanced at it. "What about it?" Tommy hesitated. Then he shook his head. "Nothing." But after that, he kept looking back more often. The mist thickened gradually as they climbed higher. The land ahead seemed longer, the path narrower, the dark wider. And once or twice, Tommy became sure he could hear movement in the fields beside them. Not sheep. Something pacing with them. But whenever he looked, there was nothing there at all. Then the bell rang. Low, distant, carried strangely through the night air. The three men stopped together. Then Tommy pointed towards the path ahead. The gate again. Same broken hinge. Same pale split through the wood. "We passed that already." Albert rounded on him. "No, we didn't." "Yes, we bloody did." Eli finally stopped walking. Not angry. Listening. That unsettled Tommy more than the gate had. "How far's the village?" Eli didn't answer straight away. "It depends where we are." And Albert barked a harsh laugh. "Oh, don't start with that." But Tommy noticed Albert looking around more carefully himself now. The confidence had begun leaking out of him, little by little. The bell rang again. Closer this time. Not louder exactly. Just nearer somehow. The three men stopped dead. Then Tommy pointed through the mist ahead. The gate again, waiting beside the path. Albert stared without speaking, and his jaw tightened. "No!" Then Eli spoke quietly into the dark. "We're boggled." Albert snapped. "Shut your mouth! I knew we shouldn't have crossed here. It's the bloody path." But Eli was no longer really speaking to Albert. He was staring out across the black moorland, as if trying to recognise something that refused to stay recognised. And Tommy's breathing had changed. Shorter now, less controlled. "We've been walking for ages." "We haven't." "We have." Albert dragged the sack back onto his shoulder. "We're tired, that's all this is." Albert then thrust the sack into Tommy's chest. "You carry it then." The money felt heavier now than when they'd left the farm. Not physically heavier, just wrong, dragging downward. The coins inside shifted with a wet, dull sound through the canvas. Then Eli stopped walking. Completely still. Beyond him, through the mist, the distant shape of the farm lantern, burning exactly where it had before, as though they'd never escaped it at all. Tommy's voice cracked. "We're going in circles!" Nobody answered, because now all three of them knew it too. The bell rang again. Not distance now. Close enough that Tommy turned, expecting to see a chapel through the mist. Nothing. Only grass. Fog. Black ground. "We should have stayed in Sheffield." Albert stepped closer. "You said we'd be clear by now." Tommy's voice had gone thin with exhaustion and panic. "You said you knew what you were doing. You said we'd disappeared proper. Now look at us. I knew I should have never trusted you." And Albert hit him, hard enough to throw him sideways off the trod. Tommy crashed into the wet ground, sliding through the mud and the rough grass. The sack dropped beside him, coins spilling dull inside the canvas. Then Tommy's leg caught something hidden under the grass. a thick old root crossing beneath the path, one they'd never seen before. He cried out sharply as his body twisted hard against it, and in the same instant, the glamour broke. The mist was thinner now, not gone, just ordinary. Morning light sat pale across the fields, the land no longer endless, the gate no longer repeating. And barely 30 yards away stood the farmer and a constable, staring directly at them from the edge of the yard. The brothers stared around themselves, trying to understand it. The farm sat directly behind them, not miles away, not beyond the rise. They'd never escaped the edge of the land at all. The constable had already heard enough. The shouting, the accusations, the confessions spilled between them in the dark. The farmer looked from the sack to Eli, then slowly across the old trod, disappearing into the mist behind them. And Eli looked at the path too, then at Albert, then at Tommy, still half in the mud. And quietly, with no triumph in it at all, he said, "I told you not to cross there after dark." And in the court later, the brothers swore that they'd walked half the night across the moor. The farmer, he said they'd barely been gone 20 minutes. They were found fighting in the mud beside his own land, not even a field away. And the locals, they laughed about it afterwards. Said that the Pixie Walk had shown them. Said the old trod had boggled them clean. And that's Giles signing off. And in the daylight, the Pixie Walk looks disappointingly ordinary. And perhaps that's what makes this story worse.